Hello, everyone. This is Sean from the Soccer Nostalgia blog. I have the pleasure to interview Argentine journalist Mr. Nacho Dimari. Mr. Dimari has appeared multiple times on a podcast discussing Argentine football history. This interview is separate from a podcast series. This video interview will serve as a companion piece to a written blog presentation on the 1986 Intercontinental Cup match between River Plate and Steaua Bucharest. Mr. Dimari will give his perspective and memories as a River Plate fan. Hello, Nacho. Always a pleasure.
Hello, how are you? The
Uh,
pleasure is mine.
let's start off by describing the status of River Plate in Argentine football at this point in the 1980s and their past performances in the Copa Libertadores up to this point.
At that time, the Copa Libertadores was the tournament that River never had the chance to win. In 1966 was the first tournament, and River arrived to the final against Peñarol de Montevideo. And in the third match in Chile, River lost 4-2 against Peñarol. I think it's one of the most, if not the most difficult match that River had to live to these days. Then in 76, 10 years later, River arrived again to the final of the Copa Libertadores, and this time was also in the third match, Cruzeiro de Brazil, who won that tournament. And believe it or not, in 1986, 10 years, 10 more years, 20 for the first final lost, River arrived to the final, this time against América de Cali, and for the first time in its richest history, won the Copa Libertadores. So it was something very, very special that all the supporters were waiting for. It was something that they were looking for a very long time. Finally managed to obtain that precious trophy. Of course, that in between there were other teams that perhaps in names of the players were very, very good, but didn't have the chance to arrive neither to the final or in the final instances of that tournament.
Can you describe the River Plate manager Hector Vieira and his trajectory up to this point?
Rodolfo Beira was one of the most important players of the 60s. He used to play in San Lorenzo, where he made the most important years of his career as player. He played in Huracan also, who's the derby of San Lorenzo. He played in Brazil. He was a very talented player, like a number 10, number 9. He was very, very talented. And as manager, he made a very good work in San Lorenzo in, I think it was 1983. At that point, San Lorenzo has recently arrived to the first division. With Veira, they made a very, very good tournament. He liked to attack a lot, but in this team especially, he made a very good defense with Nelson Gutierrez, Uruguayan defender, and Oscar Alfredo Ruggeri, who was the number 6 or defender of the national team for a lot of years. Especially in the Copa Libertadores, he tried to use a counter-attack system that perhaps River was not aware of the history of River. We River supporters love to be lyrical, to be spectacular, and that team was both things, but more in a defending position. Even though that team has a lot of very good players, we are going to analyze. But for Beira, it was very important because aside the work in San Lorenzo, it was the first, let's say, and I don't want to contrarize the San Lorenzo fans, but it was the first time who he managed to arrive to one of the most important teams in Argentina and in South America, like River. He didn't have a history in River because he never played in River. That was something that at the beginning was very, the supporters look very specially because they say he's not River. He's from another team. He came from another background. But with the winning games, he became to be more look-alike to the history of River, and that was very good seen by us, by the supporters and the press also.
Vieira achieved the Copa Libertadores win despite the transfer of the team star Enzo Francescoli just a few months prior to Racing Paris. Can you describe some of the players on the backbone of this River Plate side?
The goalkeeper was Neri Alberto Pumpido, who was at that time the goalkeeper of the national team.
And
Yes,
let's also point out that this is a few months after Argentina had won the World Cup in Mexico.
that's right. As I said, Pumpido was the goalkeeper. He came from Vélez Sarsfield a couple of years after this tournament. One of the things that were important to him is that he would have to replace perhaps the most influential goalkeeper in River history, who is Ubaldo Matildo Filiol, aside with Amadeo Carrizo. And that was very difficult because Filiol used to play, I think, more or less, if not 9 or 10 years in River, winning a lot of trophies, but unfortunately for him, not the Copa Libertadores. So it was a very difficult work he Pumpido has, but he started very good. He was a good goalkeeper. He managed to own the place as to be the number one in the River Plate team. The replacement for Pumpido was Gochea, who later became also one of the most important goalkeepers in the national team too.
Yeah.
You will
And
remember of in Italy
of
90.
course, of course, the penalty saving goalkeeper. We all
Yes.
remember. Defense, you already mentioned Oscar Ruggeri and the Uruguayan Nelson Gutierrez, but we also have the likes of Jorge Gordillo, Alejandro Montenegro, and
Mhm.
also Ruben Dario Gomez, among others.
Yes, this was the replacement of Gordillo. Gordillo was the right defender. He was the youth academy in River, and he was a very small. Our name here was Tapon. That's
A cap,
Cap.
maybe? Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Mhm.
So Tapon Gordillo was the right defender. He used to pass to attack very, very much in the team. The central defense were the two that I told you before. Nelson Gutierrez, who was a very rough defender. He used to have a very good head player. And also, he was very difficult to pass. Not only him, but Ruggeri. They were with similar characteristics and Gutierrez. I think that the attackers didn't want to play River because of those defenders. They were very, very rough and tough. And then on the left, it was Alejandro Montenegro, another player who issued from the youth team. Perhaps he was not a very lyrical player, but he used to defend well. The supporters recognized him because he scored once, I think it was in 1985. He played and he scored the one goal against Boca Juniors in a derby in the River Plate Stadium. It was a very magnificent goal. Was the replacement for Gordillo. He came, I think, from Atlanta. That's a team from the second divisions in Argentina. He was a decent player. One other important defender at that team was Jorge Borelli. He was a central defender, and he was the replacement for Gutierrez once the Uruguayan was not in fit for to be in the team.
In midfield, we have Hector Enrique, 1978 champion Americo Gallego,
Mm-hmm.
Norberto Alonso, your hero,
Mm-hmm.
Daniel Sperandio, Nestor Gorosito, a future
Yes.
international, and Claudio Morezzi.
The right midfield was Hector Enrique, called El Negro Enrique. He was a player who came from Lanús, a number 9, a center forward, but Beira used to replace him like in the middle field because he was a very technical player. He used to play center forward or number 10 in Lanús. When he arrived to River, he starts at those positions, but then Beira used to put him as a right middle field, and he gave him also the responsibility of play alongside Américo Gallego and help Gallego. So he became a very physical player, more than the technical things that he used to have naturally in his play. So he became so important for River that he caught the eye of Salvador Vilardo, who took Enrique later to the national team, and he was also one of the most important players in that magnificent team of Bilardo in '86, who played and won the World Cup in Mexico. Diego was an historical player. He was a world champion in Argentina '78. Gallego was the central midfield of that River play, but also he was a player with a fantastical background. He used to play with News Old Boys, later was the number 5 or the central defender of the Argentina National Team, who won the first World Cup in 1978. And he arrived to River, I think it was in 1980 or 81, not more than that. And he came in the first instance to replace Mostaza Merlo, who was the historical number 5 of River Plate, Reinaldo Carlos Merlo. Actually, it's the player who has played the most matches in River in the history. And he came to replace Merlo, but Merlo was a very, of course, difficult player to replace. So they play alongside some matches. And then when Merlo retired, Gallego became the number 5 of the River Plate team. He was a very rough player, a very tough player with a lot of experience, and was the one who has to play until the arrival of Enrique. Perhaps he was the only defender in that middle field of River Plate. So that's why I told you before that Beira used to manage to put Enrique alongside Gallego and try to help him in the defender team of the middle fields. But Gallego was a very experienced player. He was the captain of that team. He was one of the most important players in Argentina at that time. Alonso is perhaps the most important player in the history, the richest history of River Plate. He was a talented number 10. He was very special. He is in love with River Plate. He was the player who everybody and all the supporters wanted to be. We used to play in the school, at school, or at the park. Everybody wanted to be El Beto Alonso, Norberto Osvaldo Alonso. He was a player with a unique technique. He also became world champion in 1978 in Argentina. Even thought he didn't have a very good relation with Menotti, but that's another story. But for River, it was the most important player. He was, I think, in 78 or 77, he was at France. He was one season or
And
less than
Marseille,
one
yeah,
season
Olympique
at
Marseille.
Marseille.
Yeah.
Yes. And then in 1982, I thought he has 1 year in Vélez Sarsfield because he has a very big discussion with the manager at that time, Alfredo Di Stefano, and he left the team, but he came back and was received as a hero. And his last match was this match that we are going to speak today, the match against Steaua Bucharest. Then you told Moresi. Claudio Moresi was a very clever player, number 10, who came from Huracan. He had, I think, his most magnificent time with El Bambino Veira. One part of the season, he managed to relegate Alonso to the bench, and that was very, very difficult, something very difficult to do. He was a player who could play also as a number 9, and he scored a lot of goals in the championship, in Argentina championship, that championship that they won later. And the first part of the Copa Libertadores, I think that he was also one of the most important players of that team.
Now, as far as the forwards, we have Roque Alfaro, the Uruguayan Antonio Alzamendi, and the late Juan Gilberto Funes, who passed away just a few years later, only aged 29.
Mhm. Alfaro, he was in Colombia, but before Colombia, he was from the youth team of Newell's Old Boys. He was a very, very good player. He was a number 10, very technical. And in that team, Veira used to put Alfaro as a left wing, but collaborating a lot with the midfields. He was a very important player because he used to help also to defend. Maybe I could say like Enrique to Gallego, he will be also. Enrique was in the right of the middle field helping Gallego. Well, Alfaro had that possibility in the left part of the middle field. He was a very technical player. He was somehow discussed by the River supporters at the beginning because he couldn't manage to show all that he used to show in Newell's and in, I think it was America, the Cali. But he was a very important player for that team. He was very useful for El Bambino Veira and for that River Plate team. Alfaro, and also I think that he was a very kind person. He is a very kind person, and we have a lot of memories, good memories of him. Well, Alzamendi was an Uruguayan right winger who used to score a lot of goals. He used to play in Independiente in the late 70s, and then he arrives to River and he scores tons of goals in River. And he scored perhaps what would have been the most important goal in River Plate history. We can discuss that, but it's top two, top three, not more than that. He was a very player. He used to run a lot with the ball. He has that sense of opportunity and score, as I told you, a lot of goals. He scored important goals against Boca Juniors, against Loco Gatti, the historical goalkeeper of Boca. He used to play also in the national team, in the Uruguayan national team. Juan
That's
Gilberto Funes. Funes, he was a number 9 that River bought, I think also from Colombia. He was a very physical center forward. He was called the Buffalo. He was very big. He has perhaps not a special technique, but with his physical football, he managed to penetrate the defenses. He also scored one of the most important goals in River Plate history because he scored the goal in the final in the Copa Libertadores 1986. he managed to score the goal in the last game in River Plate. And that was something that he will remain in the history forever.
Now, let's look at Steaua Bucharest. They had won the Champions Cup by defeating Barcelona in a penalty kick shootout. And we all remember
Mhm.
Helmut Dukadam, the goalkeeper, saving all four of Barcelona's attempts. However, following that, due to an arm injury, he did not feature anymore. So
Mhm.
the goalkeeper now would be Dumitru Stingaciu. This was a team full of Romanian internationals. In defense,
Uh,
the likes of Stefan Jovan, Miodrag Belodedici, Bumbescu. In midfield, you have Tudorel Stoica, the star of the team, Ladislav Boloni, who's a
Bologna
successful manager. Yeah,
in France. He
yeah,
made a very good career as a player and then as a manager. I think he
yes.
managed Nancy, Metz, and a lot of teams.
And also manager very young Cristiano Ronaldo at Sporting in Portugal. And up front, you have the likes of Gavril Balint, Marius Lakatush, and Victor Piturca.
Iturca,
This side was managed by Angel Iordanescu, who would
Iordanescu.
become the manager of the national team just a few years later. So a very good team.
Yes, I remember that because it was the of the national Romanian team was that team of Steaua because it was also the Ceausescu team. So he wanted to won coûte que coûte, like they said in France. But it was a very important team with a lot of excellent players.
Ever since the Intercontinental Cup, the Toyota Cup, had been playing in Japan from 1979 onwards, it had been favorable to South American sides. So were River fans optimistic just for that fact?
I think so because yes, before that final of River Independiente defeat Liverpool, I remember that. I think that Flamengo also won that cup. So perhaps at that time it was something different than nowadays. The South American teams used to be most successful than the European teams at that time. I think that perhaps the fact that it was only one match that was very, from my point of view, it was very important, and that it was very good definition of one match, and that's all.
Let's look at this match. This takes place on December 8th, 1986 at Tokyo's National Stadium. For River Plate, we have the following lineup. Pumpido, Gordillo, Gutierrez, Ruggeri, Montenegro, Enrique, Gallego, Alonso, Alfaro. He'd be replaced by Sperandio in the 68th minute, Alzamendi, and of course, the captain of the team is Gallego.
Mhm.
For Stoia Bucharest, we have Stingaccio, captain of the team Jovan, Belodedici, Bumbescu, Weissenbacher, Barbulescu. He'd be replaced by Magiaru in the 60th minute. Stoica, Balan, Balint, Lakatush, and Piturka. It would not be a very pretty match.
No,
Actually, Stoia Bucharest scored a goal in the 15th minute through Belodedici that was ruled offside.
yes,
And in general, we have to say that perhaps Steaua had more control of the game, and it was really against the run of play that River Plate scored. It was in the 28th minute.
I remember that it was a very difficult game. There was a lot of tension from both teams, but I noticed that from River, of course. And that goal, I remember there was against, I think it was Funes. It was at the floor, Alonso, who was very, as I told before, a very clever player, perhaps the most cleverest player in history of real play. With Funes, he managed to look to Alzamendi, who was near the attacking place of River, and execute the foul alone without waiting the whistle of the referee. and he passed the ball to Alzamendi. Alzamendi received it. He was alone with the goalkeeper. He shot. The ball was knocked the wood, and it returned to Alzamendi. And with his head, he makes perhaps the most important goal in River Plate history. It was a very quick that, and all was born because of the intelligence of El Beto Alonso. We must say that.
Taking the lead, River Plate were just content to just defended and counterattacked as Stoia tried to make something, but Perez and Ruggeri just blocked everything in central
Hey, yeah,
defense. Yeah.
that's what I told you before. That team was very well constructed by El Bambino Veira, and managed to make a defense that was very difficult to pass. And once River opened the score, well, it will be very complicated to try to score against those defenders, Gutierrez and Ruggeri, and Gallego also going back with those defenders. So there you have three players that are specialists in keep goalkeeper alive. So Gallego in the middle field, and Ruggeri and Gutierrez in the central defense.
We should point out that Bologna was out injured, and especially the Romanian manager Iordanescu felt things would have been different with Bologna there to dictate the play, but we'll never know. Like we said, it had been a poor spectacle, but I imagine as a River Plate fan, you're just content for the victory.
I think that nobody remembers that it was a very poor match, a neutral spectator to watch. I enjoy it a lot at that moment. I enjoy it nowadays if I see some images of that match, and it doesn't matter that it was not a very we have a lot of very good matches played in our history. It doesn't matter if this one was not the most important.
Pumpido, Ruggeri, and Enrique not only won the World Cup that year, but they won this trophy that year.
Yes, they won the national championship with River in Argentina, the World Cup in Mexico with Argentina, and with River Plate, they won the Copa Libertadores, and then they won the Toyota Cup or the
Intercontinental.
Intercontinental Cup. So that was something that I think that no other player managed to do, because Julian Alvarez, who won every every championship in 2022, he wasn't playing the Copa Libertadores. So perhaps that is something that was only for reserved for those three players. And I remember a production of El Gráfico in December of that year that you could see in the bench those three players, Pumpido, Sherry, and Enrique, with all the cups winning and at this year Libertadores, the National Cup, the championship in Argentina, the World Cup in Mexico with Argentina, and that Shota Cup with River Plate.
So, how are the celebrations back in Argentina?
Everybody went to El Obelisco, and it was something incredible because I remember that it was, I think it was 7 a.m. here in the morning, more or less. Everybody was exhausted because perhaps we never went to bed the night before
Yeah.
and the night after. So it was a very good celebration that all River Plate supporters had at that time.
So,
Perhaps equally, if nowadays, as I told you before, River, now, today, it's birthday number 123. And perhaps the other most important celebration will be in 2018 when we won the Copa Libertadores against Boca Juniors, that derby final that was celebrated in Madrid. I would say that the Copa Libertadores in '86 the Intercontinental Cup in '86 too, and the Copa Libertadores in 2018 that were the most important or the most celebrated for all River Plate supporters.
In closing, you explained the legacy of this victory, but was there a feeling that, much like Barcelona in 92 when they won the Champions Cup for the first time, was there a feeling that finally River Plate had won a trophy after the Copa Libertadores, and this they had won the most important club trophies? Was there that feeling at this point?
I will add, as I told you, the Copa Libertadores won in 2018 against Boca because
But
uh,
at that point in time, though, at that
at that point it was the most important victory of River, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. Yes, both, the Copa Libertadores, the Intercontinental Cup. The Copa Libertadores was something that I think that at that time it gave us the possibility of breath. I said, oh, okay, we win it. We win the Copa Libertadores. We finally won the Copa Libertadores because it was an obsession for River at that time. It continued to be an obsession, the Copa Libertadores, to every South American team. But nowadays, the first one is always the most or the most important.
With that, I would like to thank you for sharing your memories of this important victory for River Plate. And I would urge everyone to please read the main blog article as well for more detail. The link is included in the video upload description along with our respective contact informations. So, Nacho, thank you once again and hope to continue these discussions on Argentine football history.
Okay, thank you. It's a pleasure always to be invited here. So happy birthday, River Plate.
Thank you.